The fear isn't love, it's surrendering identity. People assume avoidants run from love because they're cold, broken, or heartless. That's lazy thinking. Avoidants don't fear love. Love actually feels intoxicating to them at first. They fear the cost of love. They fear the moment affection stops being a choice and starts feeling like a responsibility. They fear becoming dependent on another person and losing control over who they are without realizing it. Avoidants grow up with a subconscious rule. If I need someone, I can be hurt. If I rely on someone, I can be abandoned. So they build their identity around self-sufficiency. They let people close in doses, then retreat the second emotional involvement becomes sticky, demanding, or interconnected. It's not affection that threatens them, it's the sense of being claimed, expected, required, or emotionally obligated. The moment closeness turns into, I can't live without you, they panic, not because the connection is meaningless, but because it starts to reshape their identity. They've spent years constructing a version of themselves that feels safe, independent, detached, unbothered, needing nothing from anyone. Love disrupts that self-image. Now they're vulnerable, influenced, affected. That feels like losing freedom, not gaining connection. This is why avoidants often behave contradictory. They want emotional intimacy but push it away. They crave bonding but sabotage it. They feel deeply but pretend it's nothing. It's not love they fear, it's becoming someone who can't walk away. When affection starts feeling like surrender. At the start, everything feels light. There are no expectations, no emotional debts, no responsibility to protect someone else's feelings. But when the bond deepens, the other person starts needing reassurance, communication, consistency, and partnership. That's where avoidants freeze. Not because they don't care, but because needing someone back feels like suffocation. To them, closeness starts to feel like losing privacy, losing emotional autonomy, becoming responsible for someone else's happiness, being judged or controlled, being dependent in ways they can't escape. Even a simple message like, "Why didn't you reply?" doesn't read as concern, it reads as pressure. A request to spend more time together feels like a demand for sacrifice. Emotional conversations feel like interrogation. Their nervous system responds to intimacy the same way others respond to threats: withdrawal, numbness, shutdown. They don't detach because they feel nothing. They detach because feeling something risks being consumed by it. Why the more you give, the more they run? People try to fix avoidance by loving them harder, proving loyalty, or giving reassurance. That backfires. Why? Because every act of love increases emotional expectations. The more someone gives them, the more they feel indebted. Love begins to feel like a silent contract. If I accept this affection, I owe something back. And avoidants don't want to owe anyone their heart. They want connection without surrender, intimacy without merging, love without losing identity. They don't want to be needed. They want to be chosen. They don't want to be responsible for someone. They want to be free beside them. That's why someone independent and self-assured feels safer to them than someone emotionally clingy. Not because they prefer coldness, but because autonomy equals safety. What actually scares them? Not vulnerability itself, but being controlled emotionally, becoming dependent, feeling trapped, losing personal identity, being unable to leave without destroying someone. They fear the emotional price that comes after love, not the love itself. The dangerous internal lie avoidants tell themselves? Avoidants often convince themselves, I function better alone. I don't need anyone. But that's not strength. That's a trauma strategy disguised as self-sufficiency. When they finally meet someone who challenges that belief, someone who sees them deeply, they pull away not out of rejection, but out of self-preservation. They'd rather lose connection than lose themselves. The tragedy is, they end up losing both. They don't realize what they lost until they feel safe enough to need what they ran from. Avoidants don't process emotions during connection. They process them after it's over, when there is no longer a threat of dependency. This is why they often seem numb during conflict, distant during intimacy, and then suddenly emotional once the other person moves on. It's delayed attachment, not lack of attachment. When you were close, they protected their autonomy. When you detach, they lose the illusion of control. Closeness felt like losing themselves. Silence forces them to confront themselves. This is where the regret actually begins, not when the bond ends, but when the other person stops carrying the emotional weight. Once there's no demand for closeness, they finally have the space to feel what they suppressed. They don't miss connection in the moment. They miss it when it no longer exists. The shift from avoiding emotional responsibility to craving emotional anchor. While involved, avoidants operate from a survival instinct. Protect myself first. This isn't logical. It's conditioned. But after separation, reality shifts. They're no longer defending themselves against dependency, yet the emotional imprint remains. The independence they fought to preserve now feels like emptiness. What they feared, dependency, starts looking a lot like something they needed but didn't allow. Do they suddenly want a relationship? Not exactly. What they want first is emotional safety without pressure, closeness without responsibility, connection that doesn't reshape identity, intimacy that doesn't demand surrender. In other words, they want the same relationship but rewritten on their terms. This is why avoidants reappear not when you're hurting, but when you've rebuilt your identity, when you're independent again, when you're not asking for closeness, when you no longer need them. Your distance removes the emotional cost. Now connection feels safe again. The identity crisis they avoided hits them later. Avoidants walk away thinking they're protecting themselves. But once they're alone, the illusion of emotional immunity cracks. Now they have to face questions they avoided. Why do I disconnect when things get real? Why do I feel calmer alone yet emptier afterward? Why do I want the person back only after they don't want me? Why does love feel like a threat instead of support? People assume avoidants don't feel deeply. Wrong. They feel deeply, but only in isolation, where no one can influence or change them. This delayed emotional processing creates a predictable cycle. 1. Connection grows, gives emotional threat rises. 2. They pull away, gives restore independence. 3. Separation gives clarity, gives regret surfaces. 4. They return, gives not for dependency, but to feel seen again. The cycle isn't about love versus indifference. It's about connection versus identity preservation. Why they come back only when you're strong again. Avoidants are drawn back when you're no longer emotionally dependent. You're emotionally secure without them. Your identity is restored, not merged. The dynamic no longer threatens their autonomy. They're not attracted to neediness. They're attracted to someone who gives connection without demanding emotional surrender. They want someone who says, I want you, not because I need you to complete me, but because I choose to. To an avoidant, that's the safest form of intimacy. Why they feared losing themselves, but end up losing what matters more. Avoidants try to protect themselves from emotional dependence. In doing so, they sacrifice support they secretly desire, vulnerability that could heal them, a partner who understood their depth, a connection that wasn't replaceable. They resist being changed by love, yet the loss changes them anyway. Their greatest fear, losing themselves, results in a more painful outcome, losing someone who saw and accepted them in ways they don't know how to accept themselves. They protect their freedom, but freedom without connection eventually feels like isolation. Love never killed their identity. Their defense mechanisms did. The final truth: avoidants aren't running from intimacy. They're running from the version of themselves they become when emotionally attached. They fear losing autonomy more than losing love. But once independence stops feeling like safety and starts feeling like loneliness, they realize connection never threatened their identity. Their fear prevented them from evolving. The transformation happens when they learn. Love isn't dependency. Vulnerability isn't surrender. Closeness doesn't erase individuality. Identity can expand, not disappear, through intimacy. Real growth for an avoidant isn't learning how to love, it's learning how to stay.